Hey, this is Cody Pfeiffer, and we're going to be talking about the final that we have in our in exceptional students class. And really, we're going to be going through a list of a lot of the exceptional students or the disabilities that I went through throughout the class period, and what kind of effects it have on their cognitive, their social, and their academic, nature and their characteristics of how they deal with it. So let's just get started. The first thing I want to talk about, though, was the idea of differentiated instructions and how this helps in terms of the school environment. So this was a very big deal, I think, in the class. In every single one of the impairments or disabilities that a certain student might have, is the idea of how we can tailor an individual, kind of instructions, or how we can tailor a lecture to meet the needs of the student, how and depending on their disorder or their disability, and to meet the needs to help them get the education that we are trying to give them to help them to bestow on upon them. And one of the main aspects of differentiated instruction is that of the assessments. Now, the idea of this is to have, not just an assessment at the end where we're just judging, how they did, you know, just to end with, but instead to have a start assessment to see where they can begin, a formal assessment, in the middle to see where they lie and how we can possibly improve how we're teaching, and to take up how much of it they're actually taking in, because a lot of times, students will pick up and leave off, certain portions of a lesson. If we can, as teachers, look back and see where we need to make improvements, what's working, what's not working, and tailor our curriculum and lesson plans based on the assessments. That's exactly what the point of assessments are for. And having a start, a mid, and a final will exactly fill that prospect of what we're trying to accomplish with differentiated instruction. So tailoring something to meet an individual's needs based on their differences, based on their individuality. Sorry. And with this, there's three aspects to the idea of differentiated learning. Taking into the idea of readiness. How ready are they to learn, what we're about to give them? How's their academic grades before this? How's their, attendance, and how well do they keep, prior transcripts to see how well they can keep, from getting distracted, how well teachers speak of them. So readiness is the first aspect we can look at. Then the second is their interest. What do they take interest in? Do they like math? Do they hate it? So do we tailor them more to the math aspect and kind of build on their strengths? Or do we work on their weaknesses? Do they absolutely hate science? So maybe we mix and group them with someone who loves science to kind of get, mid grounds where they can learn. So someone who's great at science possibly give it to someone who's not so great at science, and tailor these groups to fit together. Or we could do the complete opposite. And if two groups of people are very well, really well in the subject, you could put them two together and give them a harder assignment so that we can challenge their mind more than the assignment that perhaps you gave a different group, which is challenging. And if you split the groups up like this, you can give more time to the group that's perhaps having a tougher time learning the aspect, and less time to the group that is really pushing forward in this specific subject. And the final is learning profile, the idea of how they take the information in. So are they visual learners? Are they better reading, better at listening, and just tailoring the assessment to how they learn individually. So halfway through the class, you might have a lecture that you give, visual, you talk about it, you speak out loud, and then another portion might be a reading assignment where students that read have a much better chance of learning the information that you're trying to pertain. And tailoring this instruction can meet the individual needs of a lot of different groups of people, not just for those that have disabilities or those that are need the extra help, but to really any student that could pertain to this idea. So the first difference I'm going to talk about is that of cultural differences. So this affects, can be effective, in a classroom in a lot of different ways. And a great way to go about this is to teach about different cultures. Let's not, isolate those of different cultural values. So with a different culture, a lot of times when they're coming to our country, English will be their second language. And of course, this is going to hurt a student, socially and cognitively, and the knowledge they take in, just because the ideology that they're not going to take everything you say as a teacher. They're going to have trouble understanding some things because it is not their first language. And to tailor the assessment to this, you could, include things like captions, in English so that maybe they're not following what you're saying, but they can read it so that they're able to keep up with, maybe they're better at reading than they are, the actual speaking aspect of the English language. And, introducing people to these cultures, your students to these cultures, these different groups of things like Day of the Dead perhaps, or have a special Jewish holiday, Christmas like Hanukkah, just, give a little teaching about it can, help not isolate these students, but instead let them feel welcomed in the classroom, give them a chance to socialize better. As the students understand more about culture, it's a lot easier to socialize with these students. And tailoring the idea of, maybe visual representations, not so much speaking all the time, giving them words on paper. They are trying to learn your language, and while it's not always their first language, they're always attempting there to try to learn it. So the next one is those with communication disorders, aphasia, stuttering, etc., things like that. So aphasia itself is a language disorder that affects a person's ability to communicate. So it's they process language differently. It's not that they have problems with intellect per se, or they're still smart, but they just have problems with speech and the ability to understand it. So with this, you can make certain, inapts and precautions to help them in the classroom, because they're gonna what you're saying they're gonna take in slower, and it's gonna take more time for them to express their language, talk about it, and a lot of time with people with aphasia, especially, pictures can help them communicate very well. So the best ways to go about this is allow plenty of time for a response. They are trying to think, they're trying to construct in your head what you're saying, and giving them plenty of time to response will give them the perfect chance to, explain exactly what they're thinking. Maybe more pen and paper to the students, with aphasia and stuttering. Stuttering is more of a social problem, as stuttering kind of will isolate a student more than other aspects that children will have. Sadly, sometimes students can be cruel, and stuttering is something that can be looked down upon. A good way is to be open about it. Talk to the class about the stuttering. Talk about how it could hurt people, and be very efficient in trying to create a social group for people with stuttering. So a great way to do it is also for aphasia and stuttering is to have a quiet place. Somewhere where they're not going to be judged for their talking, and talk to the teacher one-on-one maybe, or, helping them, along with their language problems so that they could possibly develop better language aspects. Because in terms of the cognitive development, language is going to be one that is probably most likely going to fall behind, especially in the speech department, as it will not be utilized as much as other students just for the fact that they have that problem per se. So one of the videos we've seen throughout the class was the idea of helping children with their emotional and social needs. And this can be for any student, not just those that are special. And the idea was to have 5 steps that really helped teach students beyond the idea of just the education, such as self-awareness. What does your impact have on other students? What does your word have on the world? What can you say? And teaching them this, teaching them how much effect their words can have great value in helping other students in the class, not just themselves, showing that what they say can hurt, can be mean. Self-motivation. Self-management is their motivation. Social awareness is their empathy for others. Their relationships, how well they cooperate with others. And their decision-making is how well they go about thinking critically and making the decisions. So next we have up is ADHD. And, the APA, American Psychiatric Association, classifies the students as having about 5% of the population having this, whereas the CDC classifies about 11%. Now we have 3 sets of this, inattention, which they're always distracted, impulsivity, they're also interrupting, they take more risks, and then hyperactivity, they're always fidgeting and talking in class. Now, in recent years, this is, everyone knows someone with ADHD, right? It's a very growing problem. But hyperactivity and, inattention and impulsivity, they're all things that affect the cognitive development and the knowledge you take in, because constantly being distracted in class is something that is very easy to do. So the idea is, how do we help those with ADHD? Because we get distracted in class and we aren't diagnosed with ADHD, and these people have trouble. So how can we help those that are fidgeting and talking? And there's a few answers that are pretty great. It's make classroom routines. Make a constant routine that students can follow. Come in, look at the black whiteboard, and know, okay, we got to do this. Keep them from being distracted so that this doesn't hurt them in the future. Have them help them take in what you're saying. Allow for movement throughout the class. This can help, burn up the energy that they're using. Get out that impulsivity, get out that inattention that they've built up, and push towards, more of a relaxed student so that you can get it out. And let them play. Let them go at recess. Don't take that away from them, because that's exactly where they lose all this energy that they can, build up and, push through it for. So the next one is autism. Now, the very important part of this is family involvement in autism, and the idea that you want them to come along. So autism is a problem with social communication in and of itself. So children with autism really like to follow patterns. They like to, trains. They get stuck on something. They get obsessed with a single ideology. And a great way to go about helping kids with autism is to, line things up with that obsession. If they're struggling with math, create a math problem that goes off their obsession. They're obsessed with space, make a rocket ship problem. The idea that, a rocket's moving at 2 miles per hour, or that's a little under exaggerated, as rockets go much more fast than that, but a rocket's moving at 2 miles per hour and a meteor is moving at 1 mile per hour. How long will it take for them to catch up? Just something as simple as that. Just kind of associate it. Use concrete visual methods can also work to teach these students, and avoid long streams of verbal communication. These students, they're not stupid. They just have problems with communication and social interactions. They're going to have these obsessions. They can have tantrums. They can be obsessive and throw fits on the floor and just really be obsessive with things. That's the main aspect. And to take that obsession and possibly turn it into something good, to turn it, into something more, is exactly what we should try to do. So finally, we have the idea of hearing impairment. So this is one that, is going to take effect, massively on social interaction and academically. So the best way to go about this is, classroom management. So children with, hearing problems, they're going to have a language deficit because they're only taking in, the videos that we watched, only taking about 50% of what a teacher's saying. And this reduction in what they're hearing, leads to a problem with their social skills and their knowledge as they become speech. They have problems with their speech because they're not understanding exactly what they're learning. So the main effect that this has is the idea of vocabulary. They're going to have trouble hearing certain portions of a word, the silent parts of it. The problem is it's not going to lead up to how well they speak it. And, there's a lot of ways that we can help those with hearing impairment. Classroom management, so they can read your lips. Stimulus to keep them awake, to keep them engaged, because when they're not hearing, they're going to get bored. Technology, there's tons of technology out there, so we need to be able to utilize that and give more visual representations. And one of the best ways is to cut out the background noise. Close the door, close the windows, stop them from hearing everything else, and get them more in tune to the lesson itself. Because while they're trying their best, but they're only taking in certain amounts, and the teacher keeping them engaged and being able to read the lips of the student will certainly help those that are hearing impaired, and in turn cause them to have a better social interaction because they're learning to speak better and have better knowledge in terms of their education, as they're able to take down better vocabulary, better math. Because when you're losing out on 50% of class, it adds up. So the conclusion of this is, we take our differentiated learning and apply it to autism, ADHD, hearing impairment, TBI, communication, and culture, and place it all into one big conclusion to help a student learn. We are the future of teaching.